If you don't like yourself, or more specifically, the way that your body looks, then you're not alone. Unfortunately, studies show that as much as 84% of women are dissatisfied with their bodies, which can lead to eating disorders, depression, and low self-esteem. In this video, I'm going to be talking about what led us to this place. When did we become so dissatisfied with our bodies? How did this happen, and who or what is responsible for this? Can we change it? Is that even possible? I want to investigate what it would take for women of all sizes to be able to accept themselves, just the way they are.
I like you. Very much.
Apart from the smoking and the drinking and the vulgar mother and the verbal diarrhea.
No, I like you very much. Just as you are.
Ew, no. No, not because a man says we're okay. I mean, how can we accept and dare I say like our bodies because we say we're okay? What would that look like, and what would it take to get there? Follow along and let's try and learn together. So I want to start by talking about my personal history with this topic and why it interests me so much. I'm pretty sure that my body dissatisfaction started in grade 8, when one of my friends said that I'd porked on a lot of pounds recently. And despite that being just a flippant remark made many moons ago, it has stayed with me all this time. In fact, I remember the hallway we were standing in, the class we were about to go into, and the Gap overalls I was wearing, which, frankly, I had thought were cute until that moment. And despite the fact that I was a fairly average-sized woman for most of my early adulthood, I received many other mean comments along the way, and they've burned themselves into my brain. Like the time someone yelled from their car that I was fat as I was out for a walk, or the time I was in line at the drive-thru and the man in the car behind me yelled that I was a fat cow, leaving both me and the worker in the window mortified. Right now, I find myself in the position of having experienced life as a straight-sized person, knowing what thin privilege feels like, to being in a fat body and experiencing what that feels like. Truthfully, I used to think that it was my fault that I didn't like my body and that it was uniquely my issue to resolve. And of course, I thought that meant abusive diet and exercise regimes. However, since I've been inhabiting this larger body, I've become more attuned to the way that society tells us all that we're not good enough. Not just, but especially those in larger bodies. And all of these experiences together have led me to today, where I find myself questioning, why is it that body acceptance is such a hard concept? So let's start by looking back, way back, with some very brief history. You might be surprised to find out that our body acceptance story has its roots in patriarchy and white supremacy. In the 1800s, life in America was very patriarchal, and as such, women existed purely as bodies for men, and they were expected to be thin, delicate creatures, which meant that overeating and any notion of larger bodies was said to be immoral and something that would destroy one's beauty. As well, explicit racial superiority was very much a thing, and it wasn't just good enough to be white. No. You had to be Anglo-Saxon American to be at the top. And how could you tell who that was? You guessed it. They would be a tall, trim person. Someone far too good to debase themselves by eating to excess or living in a larger body. Naturally, women bared the brunt of these expectations, as they were the ones viewed only as objects that existed for the male gaze. And they were the ones repeatedly told that restricting one's eating was akin to godliness, and that fat bodies belonged to those of less superior stock, such as Africans or lower-class white people whose larger bodies made them suitable for labor. Perish the thought. And even as time went on and more immigrants flooded into America, racial stratification based on appearance persisted. And the most desirable immigrants were those that were naturally, of course, white, as well as tall, thin, and beautiful. Now, fast forward a few hundred years to, let's say, the 1960s. While the civil rights and feminist movements were both doing their best to fight for equality and smash the patriarchy, the norms and values of the systems that they were fighting against had been ingrained to society. As a result, despite all the good these movements have accomplished, those ideologies are still very much a part of our culture today, even though many of us don't even realize it. Now, of course, this is not a history lesson, and certainly I've only grazed the surface. But I want you to take away something, and that is this. Body acceptance issues are not just a modern problem based on our vanities. They're connected to the very foundations of our North American society. So with that in mind, let's talk about our current state of affairs. What's driving this body dissatisfaction machine, and why can't we stop it? Well, meet diet culture. If you haven't heard that term before, diet culture is a system of beliefs that worships thinness and equates it to health and moral virtue, which means you can spend your whole life thinking you're irreparably broken just because you don't look like the impossibly thin ideal. Diet culture promotes weight loss as a means of attaining higher status, which means you feel compelled to spend a massive amount of time, energy, and money trying to shrink your body, even though the research is very clear that almost no one can sustain intentional weight loss for more than a few years. Diet culture demonizes certain ways of eating while elevating others, which means you're forced to be hyper-vigilant about your eating, ashamed of making certain food choices, and distracted from your pleasure, your purpose, and your power. And finally, diet culture oppresses people who don't match up with its supposed picture of health, which disproportionately harms women, femmes, trans folk, people in larger bodies, people of color, and people with disabilities, damaging both their mental and physical health. Now, I could go on about this topic forever, and it has so many facets. But in the interest of time, I'm only going to focus on one of the biggest myths that is harming body acceptance today. And that is that being fat is unhealthy and therefore must be avoided at all costs. This message of thin equaling healthy is being used as a justification for all sorts of egregious behavior, including the creation of the so-called obesity epidemic, which has caused anti-fat bias to skyrocket. And as a result, the general public feels justified in assigning morality to one's size and treating people, including vulnerable children, who don't meet their size standards horribly. But does the research agree? Well, no. A study published by the American Medical Association in 2005 sought to prove that excess body weight was associated with a higher mortality rate. But what they actually found was that being underweight was more dangerous. Now, you might find yourself resisting this information, and I totally get that, because it's not what you've been led to believe. And you might be saying to yourself, well, that's just one study. Actually, there's a lot of other studies that have had similar findings, and I'll list some of them here. Now, I should note that I'm not trying to convince you that being fat is healthy in referencing these studies. But what I do want you to realize is that a person's health is not determined by their size. There are fat healthy people, there are thin unhealthy people, and there's every variant in between. So, to bring this long, complicated story to a close, the obesity crisis that North America is supposedly facing is made up. And I'm sure it won't surprise many of you to hear it all comes down to politics and money. Because basically, a lot of people profit from us thinking that there's something wrong with our bodies. Which is why it's really hard to get anywhere on moving the needle towards greater body acceptance. And this is despite the studies that show that body size is not an indicator of health. And despite the research that overwhelmingly shows that dieting does not work in the long term. And in fact, it's pretty unhealthy for you.
And isn't it ironic? Don't you think?
So let's recap. Body dissatisfaction goes way back. It's rooted in patriarchy and white supremacy, and it's currently kept alive by capitalism via the media, health professionals, the government, and the multi-billion-dollar diet industry, who all together form the giant machine called diet culture. And I'm not gonna lie, that's pretty messed up, and it's definitely wreaking havoc on our physical and mental health. But wait, all is not lost.
But wait, there's more.
There are some great movements out there that have been working tirelessly to try and change things, such as Health at Every Size. They work on getting the medical field to acknowledge that not only is size not a determinant of health, but crucially that all people, including fat people, deserve access to fair and respectful medical treatment. There's also the umbrella of body acceptance, body positivity, and body neutrality movements, which all seek to spread awareness and teach people that all bodies are acceptable and deserve respect. And they're really working towards increasing representation of diverse bodies in the media, which studies show is associated with greater body satisfaction. So what could the future look like? Well, activist and writer Aubrey Gordon has written beautifully on this subject, and she envisions that in the new world of body acceptance, each of us will be judged based on our actions, not our bodies, where bodies are not believed to be meritocracies and thinness is not understood to be a crowning achievement. And this may seem cheesy, but honestly, this topic goes beyond body acceptance in North American culture. Our lack of body acceptance is actually part of a larger universal problem, and people all over the world are suffering from discrimination for so many things that aren't warranted. As Aubrey says, we need a world that insists upon safety and dignity for all of us, not because we are beautiful, healthy, blameless, exceptional, or beyond reproach, but because we're human beings. So, that's all for today. I know this was a lot of information, so I really encourage you to take some time to sit back and reflect on what it means for you. And if you've enjoyed this video and you're interested in learning more, I have listed some great books and resources in the description box below, so go ahead and check those out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic day, and take care. Oh, darn it all. Diet culture demonized. Well, activist and writer got. Oh, nuts, that was good. You better work. Okay. That almost no one can sustain attentional wait. That's all, folks. One more time for the people in the back. Okay, let's get this done, son. What are we doing? Oh yes, we're fine.